Mary stood outside Tim's door, her hand resting on the doorknob. The weight of her decision felt heavy, but she knew she couldn't delay it any longer. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away before they could fall. She had made up her mind. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Inside, Tim sat on his bed, fiddling with the corner of his blanket. His pajamas were mismatched, his hair a mess, and his eyes darted toward her, full of worry. "Mom?" he asked. "What's wrong?" Mary forced a small smile. "Timmy, we need to talk," she said, sitting down next to him. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think it's time for you to go to the ranch." Tim blinked, confused. "The ranch?" "The group home we visited," she explained. "Remember, you met Malcolm there. He was really nice to you." Tim nodded slowly, but his fingers twisted the blanket harder. "I liked Malcolm." "I know you did," Mary said, rubbing his back. "He liked you too. And at the ranch, there will be people there to help you. You'll make friends, Timmy, and I'll visit all the time." Tim stayed quiet, his eyes dropping to the floor. "When?" he whispered. "Tomorrow," Mary said softly. "We'll leave tomorrow morning?" The next day came faster than Mary expected. She hadn't slept much the night before, and Tim was quiet as they packed his things. He watched her silently, a nervous energy surrounding him. The drive to the ranch was silent, except for the soft hum of the car. When they arrived, Esther, the head of the staff, was waiting to greet them. She smiled warmly at Tim. "Welcome, Tim. We're so glad to have you here." Tim gave a small nod, his eyes on the ground. "Your mom and I have spoken, and we're going to take good care of you," Esther continued, turning to Mary. "You're making the right choice." Just then, Malcolm appeared, grinning wide. "Hey, Tim," he called out. "Glad you're here. We're going to have a blast." Tim's face brightened a little. He liked Malcolm, and knowing he'd have a friend made the transition a bit easier. At the ranch, Tim wasn't like most 19-year-olds. He was still wearing diapers, and the staff knew it was something they needed to work on. For now, though, they focused on making him feel comfortable and getting him used to the new routine. Heather, one of the caretakers, was the one responsible for helping Tim with his changes. At first, she found it a little awkward. Tim was tall, taller than her, in fact, and every time she had to help him change his diaper, she felt self-conscious. "All right, Tim," Heather said one afternoon, holding a fresh diaper in her hands. "Let's get you cleaned up." Tim stood there, awkwardly shifting his weight. He was used to the routine, but standing there, towering over Heather, made him feel strange. Heather looked up at him, feeling the awkwardness herself. "It's okay, Tim. You're doing fine." Tim nodded. "I'm wet," he mumbled, looking embarrassed. Heather gently helped him out of his diaper, wrapping up the used one and sliding on the fresh one. "It's nothing to worry about," she said with a smile. "You're doing great." Tim didn't say much after that, just quietly let her finish. A few weeks later, the group from the ranch went to a soccer game. Tim was excited. He loved the idea of being out at a game, and he sat with Malcolm in the stands, munching on nachos. By halftime, he had cheese all over his face and hands, but he was grinning from ear to ear. "Look at my nachos!" Tim laughed, showing Malcolm his messy creation. Malcolm chuckled. "You're making a serious mess, Tim." But by the end of the game, Malcolm noticed something was wrong. Tim was sitting too still, a far-away look in his eyes. "Hey, Tim," Malcolm said quietly, leaning in. "Do you need to go to the bathroom?" Tim shook his head, his face flushing red. "No." Malcolm sighed. "You're wet again, aren't you?" Tim nodded, his shoulders slumping. They made their way to the bathroom where Heather was waiting. She gave Tim a kind smile, but the situation was always a little awkward. Tim was taller than her, and standing in the small bathroom stall, she had to look up at him. "Let's get you changed," she said, holding up a fresh diaper. She worked quickly, but it still felt strange. changing to someone so much taller and older. Afterward, Tim sighed. "I don't want to wear diapers anymore," he admitted softly, looking down at Heather. Heather gave him a reassuring smile. "You're doing your best. We'll work on it." After the soccer game, the staff decided it was time to transition Tim into pull-ups. It was a big step, and though Tim still had accidents, he was determined to make it work. The first few days were tough. Tim would come to Heather, his face red, mumbling, "I'm a little wet," and she'd help him into a fresh pull-up. But over time, the accidents became less frequent. He was slowly getting the hang of it. One morning, after a particularly dry week, Tim's mom came to visit. "Look at you, Timmy," she said proudly, hugging him tight. "You're doing so well." Tim smiled shyly. "I'm in pull-ups now," he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "No more diapers." "I'm so proud of you," Mary said, her eyes watering. "You're doing great." Tim continued to improve, and life at the ranch began to feel more settled. He still wore pull-ups at night, but during the day he was managing to stay dry most of the time. Malcolm and Tim were inseparable, playing chess together every night and taking walks during the day. But then, the news came. Malcolm's family was moving, and he would be leaving the ranch. Tim was devastated. The accidents started happening more often again, and Tim became quieter. He threw a tantrum one night after losing a game of Sorry and stormed off to his room, locking the door behind him. The next day, things got worse. After a small argument with one of the staff members, Tim bolted out of the house and into the woods, wearing nothing but a pull-up. The staff called Mary in a panic, and she rushed over. When they found him, Tim was sitting under a tree, knees pulled up to his chest, his face streaked with tears. "Timmy," Mary said softly, kneeling beside him. "What are you doing out here?" Tim sniffled, wiping his nose. "I don't want to be here anymore," he whispered. "I can't do it." Mary's heart broke, and she wrapped her arms around him. "I know it's hard, baby," she said, holding him tight. "But you're trying, and I'm so proud of you." That night, after they brought Tim back and got him cleaned up, Mary sat with the staff to figure out what to do next. It was clear that the ranch wasn't the solution anymore. Tim needed a different kind of support. The next day, Mary called Malcolm and Sue. Together, they came up with a new plan. Tim would come home, but he wouldn't be alone. Malcolm would move in temporarily, and they'd all help Tim together. When Tim came home, he was nervous, but seeing Malcolm there waiting for him made all the difference. "You came back," Tim said, his face lighting up. "Of course I did," Malcolm replied. "We're in this together." Over the next few weeks, Tim made even more progress. He still wore pull-ups at night, but during the day he was dry almost all the time. He and Malcolm fell back into their routines, chess at night, walks during the day, and sometimes they'd even go to hockey games. One night, as Mary tucked Tim into bed, he looked up at her, his face calm and thoughtful. "Mom," Tim said softly, "I think I'm getting better." Mary smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You are, Timmy," she whispered. "You really are." For the first time in a long while, Mary felt like everything was going to be okay. Dear little ones, I have some sad news to share. This may be my last video. Recently, my channel was demonetized, and with the lack of support on Patreon, understandably because times are tough, I've been deliberating whether or not to retire my channel. I haven't made up my mind yet, and this decision depends on several factors, including whether I have the time and financial ability to keep it going. This video was made weeks before its release, and I'm still in the process of deciding. I want you to know that I have many stories I've worked on over the years, at least 20 that I haven't posted yet. So if I do continue, there will be more content to come. But if this does end up being my final video, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching and supporting me all this time. If it's not, please continue to enjoy my stories, and know how much I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you, and I love you all.